djwoodbeats.com.
I can do anything, fuck your opinions and energy. I finally got the epitome. My biggest hindrance was God can't do nothing but fail. Greater is me, I never needed your deity. All of this human capacity, when it gets rough, I can pick myself up and prevail. I can do anything, fuck your opinions and energy. I finally got the epitome. My biggest hindrance was God can't do nothing but fail. Greater is me, I never needed your deity. All of this human capacity, when it gets rough, I can pick myself up and prevail.
What's up, family, and welcome back to another Bible study with an ex-pastor on this beautiful Wednesday evening, where, as you can see, the sun has completely set where I am. But so glad to have you all in the building. I hope you all are ready for this, man. We've been going through the book of Exodus for a while now, and this has been an incredible conversation. And last week we had to kind of truncated a little bit, but we still got, I think now, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we got a lot of value out of last week's conversation. And so I'm definitely looking forward to everything that is coming. So let me do a few announcements and then we're going to jump right into this. All right. So big one, ex-pastor call-in show is coming up. Yeah, it's that time again. So this Sunday evening, I believe, yep, I think my math is right. This Sunday evening is going to be another round of the Ex-Pastor Call-In Show. This is our 6th episode and is actually our last episode of the year because it's the first Sunday of the year. You know, then next time it'll be the first Sunday of next year. But this one is a little extra special. As a matter of fact, it's going to be epic, if I can say so myself. Not only will it be Kyle and myself, it will also be a good friend of mine that I met on the recent retreat, A.T. Coffee, who was a Southern Baptist pastor for years. Drew Belkis, who was also a charismatic pastor. And then Sean Towers, who is also a preacher. So it's going to be 5 of us. You got 5 ex-pastors and preachers, man, on one panel. And so I think this is going to be epic. I am sincerely looking forward to this, so I cannot wait for that. So make sure you put that on your calendars if it's not on there already. Let's see here. What else? Okay, of course, if you haven't already, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, consider supporting, joining, or connecting with this community channel or content in any way that makes sense for you. And then, of course, check out our merch because we have some pretty dope merch. And if you look behind me, you get a glimpse at some of the books that we have. So check those out, too. And then I think if I swing my chair the right way, I'm not going to do so. You might see my plate from the food that I ate earlier because I am just now remembering that I forgot to remove it. But, you know, that's a whole nother other thing. But yes, Ex-Pastor Call-In Show, this coming up Sunday is going to be epic. Also, we're in an incredible new series on our Sunday sessions. What is this one called? The Work. This past Sunday, we had actually one of our best attended Sunday sessions since we've started. And we're in a new series called Do the Work, or in the new series called The Work. And last week's conversation was Do the Work. This week's conversation will be do it right. After that, it'll be do your best. And then we're going to end that bad boy with do the most. So you can check in with that stuff. Also, I don't know how I forgot this. Your boy has a new book that's coming out, and it's already available for pre-release, and the order date, the release date, like it's available for pre-release now, but the release date is Friday, this Friday. And in this book, I'm walking you through the first 2 years of my life after deconverting and what that was like going from being a full-time pastor. Oh, man. And walking away in the middle of some things that I had going on. I had some other things going on. It's amazing, but you'll just have to read the book to find out, or you can go check out the 2 videos that I did this week and last week, where I've given you like 3 chapters in both videos for free. And actually, one of those videos, you got an introduction and an epigraph. So you got 8 chapters. You got 8 chapters for free. I mean, what better appetizer could you ask for? So go check that out. All right. Are y'all looking forward to this? We've been in Exodus for a while now. I am super excited about this conversation, especially because I got a little bit of time to talk. I know some of y'all might be doing, your Thanksgiving tomorrow, or Indigenous Awareness tomorrow, whatever you're doing tomorrow. Eat well, live well, and be well. But today, we're about to learn the Bible and laugh at the bullshit. And so in order for us to really get started, because it wouldn't be a show in the book of Exodus if we didn't bring Jason on the stage. So Jason, how the hell are you, man? Welcome back to the show. How's everything going for you, man?
Man, it's going great. I had all of last week off of work. So it was basically like 10 days where I didn't have any responsibilities, which basically meant that I filled every single minute of it being busy doing something else. And finally today I went back to work, and I probably did less today than I did at any point in the previous week and a half, because that's what I do whenever I have free time, is I fill every second of it. We were hiking, we were paddling, we were camping. The temperature dropped like 9 degrees colder than the weather report originally showed. We were expecting it to drop down to about 39. And it was like 37 whenever I was cooking dinner at the campsite. And by the time we went to bed, it was, I think, like 35 or something. It got pretty cold. It was like down to like 30 degrees plus wind chill. The dog got all bundled up. She looked like a big croissant made of fleece blankets, and there was some little eyes poking out. But we had a blast. Hiking basically every single day, paddling, just hanging out, all kind of stuff. So yeah, we had fun.
Man.
And today I only had to work half a day at work, so that was even better.
You.
Yeah.
Man.
So.
Well, I can say it has been a little quieter this week at work, so I've actually been able to get more done because majority of people are kind of taking some time off, so there's not as much people bothering me as there normally is.
Oh, that's nice.
So that's been a little refreshing because I am getting some things worked on for my team that I'm really excited about. So that's cool. All right, so last time you and I talked, which was last week, you said pretty boldly that this might be the last episode for Exodus, because like after here, it's pretty much a wrap. So give us a summation of where we've been, what we've hit, and then kind of tell us why you think this is it for the like how many more chapters do we have here?
We got 3.
3 chapters. All right, and so
3 chapters.
Tell us what we should be looking forward to as we wrap this thing up.
Yeah, so what we kind of did was we learned that this book was compiled, in stages. It's originally started off with Moses at the burning bush, and then he goes to Egypt and he works a few miracles for the Hebrew elders. He works a miracle for the Egyptians, and then all the people leave. They go out into the wilderness. There's a miraculous water crossing, and then they get to this spot where the water isn't very good to drink. And so they make this little totem devoted to Yahweh, and they cast it into the water. and that purifies the water as a symbol of Yahweh's power over the elements. And then they get this covenant, and that's basically the end of the story. And then all these other things that we've had, things that came before, during, and after all of that, that was all added in later by other people who had other stories concerning this folk hero named Moses, who was sort of like a retooling of previous characters, like Sargon the Great, Hammurabi, was the name, Osiris, Dionysus, Joshua. And so all these different people are sort of being like, they're writing different things about these characters and making them stories of Moses. And then these things are all getting added into the story. And that's why you have like all the livestock of the Egyptians killed multiple times. That's because each source had different plagues that occurred. And so all these different things get added in. And then even after that, when they get instructions on how to build the temple and stuff like that, they had multiple versions of it. And so the really long version, they put that in earlier in the book. And then here at the tail end of it, we have the earlier version, which was much shorter. And they add in a few lines here and there to say, they built the things like this, and they put in the details in accordance with how it was outlined earlier in the book, so that you won't think that they're actually including two different versions of it. Sort of the same way that the story of Noah has all these duplicate details. It's two different versions of the story, and they're both being crammed in here. And we also learned that there was parts of the Odyssey in here, like whenever Aaron goes and he makes like the sacred cow and all of this other stuff. These are stories. These are Greek legends that are being modified to serve a theological purpose for Second Temple Jews. And so we got to touch on all kind of cool stuff like that. And now here we are at the end of the book. We've been doing, 2 to 4 episodes, 2 to 4 chapters per episode recently. And here we are. We've got 3 chapters left. The chapters aren't very long, and they're covering material that, in part, we've already discussed in earlier episodes, because this material is basically shorter versions, or actually the original versions of these details concerning the construction of like the tent of meeting and the altar of burnt offerings and things like that. And we've already covered the longer version that was added in later in previous chapters. So we kind of have almost like a synopsis here in the final chapters of the book. So I don't think it's going to take us very long to get through the rest of Exodus. I think we'll be done. Let's see. It's 6:15 here on the East Coast. 7:30 tops.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to say that. I'm going to say 7:30. That's my estimate.
Man. Well, listen. If y'all are watching, y'all might want to put some money on that action, man. Let's see how this goes. Let's see if we hit that mark. Well, I'm excited about it. Let me get the book pulled up on the screen. And again, for those of you who are watching, if this is your first time, this is Bible Study with an Ex-Pastor, where we're here to learn the Bible and laugh at the bullshit. And we don't mean that in a derogatory way. We mean that in a way that this is a safe space for you to explore the Bible and kind of share all of the thoughts that you've always had, and some of the things, call out some of the stuff that you've always wanted to call out, while at the same time getting somewhat, especially for the book of Exodus, somewhat an understanding of the scholarship behind the mythology, the scholarship behind the culture, and the way that these stories kind of comes to be. And we have learned so much in this book so far. And tonight we're getting ready to book in this conversation. So let's see what we're finding in Exodus chapter 38, which starts off with making the altar of burnt offering. Let's see how this thing rolls. He made the altar of burnt offering of acacia wood. It was 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. It was square and it was 3 cubits high. He made horns for it on its 4 corners. Its horns were of one piece with it, so he overlaid it with bronze. He made all the utensils of the altar, the pots, the shovels, the basins, the forks, and the fire pans. All its utensils he made of bronze. He made for the altar a grating, a network of bronze under its ledge, extending halfway down. He cast 4 rings on the 4 corners of the bronze grating to hold the poles. He made the poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with bronze. And he put the poles through the rings on the sides of the altar to carry it with them. He made it hollow with boards. All right, I kind of see where this is going already. And I see we have a super chat, so let me hit that real quick. I'll open up the betting at £5. Go ahead. We appreciate you, Muttley. As always, great to see you in the building, man. And I did see that you had this call out, so I had to put it out because it's very clear now. Spoiler alert. The book details every single hour of those 2 years. It's a long book. Hilarious. I'm terrified. All right, so here we go. Verse 8, he made the basin of bronze with its stand of bronze from the mirrors of the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He made the court for the south side. The hangings of the court were of fine twisted linen, 100 cubits long. Its 20 pillars and their 20 bases were of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their bands were of silver. For the north side, there were hangings 100 cubits long. Its 20 pillars and their 20 bases were of bronze. But the hooks of the pillars and their bands were of silver. For the west side, they were hanging 50 cubits long with 10 pillars and 10 bases. The hooks of the pillars and their bands were of silver. Oh, that could have been some bars there. And for the front to the east, 50 cubits. The hangings for one side of the gate were 15 cubits with 3 pillars and 3 bases. And likewise for the other side, on each side of the gate of the court were hangings of 15 cubits with 3 pillars and 3 bases. All the hangings around the court were of fine twisted linen. The bases for the pillar were of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their bands were of silver. The overlaying of their capitals was also of silver, and all the pillars of the court were banded with silver. The screen for the entrance to the court was embroidered with needlework in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen. It was 20 cubits long, and along with the width of it, 5 cubits high, corresponding to the hangings of the court. There were 4 pillars, and their 4 bases were of bronze, their hooks of silver, and the overlaying of their capitals and their bands of silver. All the pegs of for the tabernacle and for the court, all around, were of bronze. These are the records of the tabernacle of the covenant, which were drawn up at the commandment of Moses, the work of the Levites being under the direction of Ithamar, son of the priest Aaron, Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, made all that the Lord commanded Moses, and with him was Oholiab, and son Ohasamach of the tribe of Dan, engraver, designer, and embroiderer in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and in fine linen. All the gold that was used for the work and all the construction of the sanctuary, the gold from the offering was 29 talents and 730 shekels, measured by the sanctuary shekel. The silver from those of the congregations who were counted was 100 talents and 1,000, even 775 shekels, measured by the sanctuary shekel. A beka a head, that is, half a shekel, measured by the sanctuary shekel. For everyone who was counted in the census from 20 years old and up, for 603,550 men, the 100 talents of silver were for casting the bases of the sanctuary and the bases of the curtain, 100 bases for the 100 talents, 1 talent per base. Of the 1,775 shekels, he made hooks for the pillars and overlaid their capitals and made bands for them. The bronze offering was 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. With it, he made the bases for the entrance of the tent of meeting, the bronze altar, and the bronze grating for it, and all the utensils of the altar. The bases all around the court, and the bases of the gate of the court, all of the pegs of the tabernacle, and all the pegs around the court. Okay, so there's a lot of pegging going on in this chapter. I just want to call that out from the jump. I felt a little uncomfortable at certain points. But there are definitely a lot of details here, and I do feel like some of this, if not all of this, we've read before. The one thing that I did notice different here was that I saw a reintroduction of some names that we haven't seen for a few chapters. And it's almost like they're kind of taking us back through a lineage. Let me see, where was I? I may have just ran past it. Yeah, because they take us back to Bezalel, Uri, son of Hur. There we go, and Aholiab and Ahasamach, which I remember messing up those names earlier in this book. So why, if you know, why are they showing back up in this particular part of the book, in this synopsis, if you will?
Yeah, so the main thing there is these were people who were connected with the Jerusalem temple at the time that this story was written. And they basically had like a contract to do a lot of this work. They won the bidding, and they got the thing, okay? More than likely, they were related to one of the priests, and so there was some money passed under the table. Archaeological evidence shows that there was a lot of crooked stuff going on with the temple. So you know how you're going to see this pop up, I believe in Leviticus, definitely in Deuteronomy. They have very specific instructions concerning weights and measures. Like you have, this stuff has to be uniform, and it's like a big no-no. It's a sin to have two different weights to use when measuring things out, because that's crooked, that's dishonest. Okay. Excavations at the Temple Mount reveal that they had multiple stones with the same weight markings on them of different sizes. So if you were going over to the temple and you're okay, you have to donate, X amount of wheat. Okay. You got to put it up there. The weight that they're going to use to put on the other side of that scale, on that balance, is going to be much larger than it actually is supposed to be. So it's going to take like 5 times the amount of wheat to equal, however much you're supposed to donate. But then if they're paying you, they're going to get the smaller weight and put up there. But then if someone comes in and says, well, look, I've got this thing, this is measured out, this is, the exact thing. Well, then they're going to take out the stone with the correct measurement and put that up there. Oh, look, see? Yeah. They had multiple, like these stones. They'd have like 2 or 3 different size stones with the same weight markings carved into them so they could cheat people. And so, that was just a thing that they did. Okay, so there was a lot of corruption. So the whole thing in here was, Yahweh specifically chose the best craftsmen to come in and do the work. He paid a bribe to whoever made the decision. That person then said, you know what? I'm hearing a voice, Yahweh. Let me reach into my little ephod here. Let me pull out a stone, and then they pull. Oh, hey, look, it's a black stone. That means we want this guy. We want Bezalel. He's going to do it. And so, that's why these people are chosen, because more than likely they paid some kind of contract, and now they're doing the work. It's only them and their families who are allowed to do certain types of work on the temple. And that's why they're mentioned here, is to say, well, the reason we pick his family is because once upon a time an ancestor with the same name was chosen by God himself. And this was spoken to Moses when he went up on the mountaintop. It's an ideological tale. It's to explain why they do things a certain way. That's why those dudes are, that's why those names are popping up again. And when we covered those in the earlier chapter, that's basically a rewriting of this chapter right here. And of course they use the same names because that's the person who's still doing it, or that's the family that's doing it. It's Bezalel's, tapestry works or whatever, so that's what we're seeing there with that guy. And then the whole thing it goes through, they're talking about like the court of the tabernacle and the tent of meetings. And what this is, these are two identically sized square tents that are sort of conjoined to make a rectangle that's twice as long as it is wide. It's like 50 cubits by 100 cubits, I think. And they're basically mirror images of one another. So the court of the tabernacle, that's where Yahweh is. In the middle of it is this little square enclosure. That's the Holy of Holies. Okay. And directly in front of that is the little altar of incense that I think we talked about maybe 1 or 2 chapters ago.
Yep.
And then just to the east of it, connected to the front of this thing is the tent of meeting. And this is where people who aren't the high priest can go into. And this is where you have the altar of Holocaust, or the altar of burnt offering. And the two things are separated by this partition, okay? And the door to the whole thing faces to the east. That's sun worship. We already talked about that. And the tent of burnt offering is meant to be sort of like the earthly version of the tent of the altar of incense that's in the other side. And so you burn things that are made on earth in the tent of meeting, and then you burn the incense in the court of the tabernacle. And that's meant to be like, this is the heavenly version and this is the earthly version. Because remember, these people, they believe that the things that happened on earth were sort of a shadow of the things that happened up in the heavens.
Right.
And they talk about like how they have people who minister at the opening of the tent of meeting. And depending on which version of the Bible you read, it may say that there are people ministering there, or there are priests, or there are temple servants. But if you read the older, like the more accurate versions of the thing, the ones that have undergone fewer redactions, it talks about ministering women. Now this gets modified in later generations, and they get rid of all the women from the temple. But there were these women who ministered at the entrance to the tent. Now, what exactly they did, we don't know, because those little tidbits are gone. We've lost them. They're referenced again in 1 Samuel chapter 2. And so these women, they played some role. Now, in here, they're just ministering at the opening of the tent. So they may be involved in some sort of ritual purity practice, going through, it could be a thing. Maybe they wash your hands and feet or something. They hold some little towel to help dry you all. We don't really know. Okay. Anything we have is kind of speculation. Yeah. However, what we do know is that them being this little ministering role at the entrance is already a reduction in their previous role, because we have records from one of these Yahwistic temples from centuries before this, and this is over in Egypt, and these women, they didn't just wash your feet or wave incense smoke or something like that over you when you walked through the little curtain. No, they were serving as priestesses inside the temple.
Wow.
So already right here, them being like at the doorway to it, they're already being pushed out a bit. Previously, they were inside. They had a serious, central function within the temple, and we have written record of that. And these are among some of our oldest Hebrew writings. These are the ones that survive at Elephantine from Egypt. It's this island settlement in the Nile, the southern edge of Egypt, and it was a fort. The Egypts used to use it to watch over the nation to the south of them, and then later the Persians, they had a sort of garrison installed there to watch over the Egyptians, and there were Jews living in this place for centuries, and they had this whole temple to Yahweh, and so we get a good glimpse of the practices in a temple to Yahweh from a time dating back before the Old Testament. And it was very weird. Like Yahweh has a wife. There's all these other gods. They're worshiping Egyptian gods. And they're in communication with the priests in Jerusalem who have no problem with any of this. And these people have no idea about Moses, about the patriarchs. They've never heard the name Abraham in their life. The whole, like, this entire thing that we call, like, the Torah, they're completely oblivious to it. They've never heard of it. They don't even know about the Passover. They have a similar festival, but it has, like, the origin story just doesn't exist. So it's very interesting. So these women, these ministering women, these are former priestesses they now have a reduction in their role, and they're now doing some other duty at the entrance to the tent. But we have no idea if they're inside the tent at all. There's no mention of that. So it seems like they're kind of like the Levites at this point. They've been kind of pushed out. They have some other duties now. They're connected, but not as prominent. And then it talks about this great basin they use for this ritual washing to purify themselves. This was meant to represent the water that surrounded the world. So they imagined the world was a big disc, and all the land was basically this island in the middle of it, and Jerusalem was pretty much like right dead in the center. And you had like Israel and Syria, you had Babylon off to the east, you had Arabia, Egypt, and like Libya, and you had like the Mediterranean Sea. That wasn't a sea. They thought that was like pretty much the edge of the world. Okay, you had like Italy and Greece over there. And then beyond that, it was all just water. It was like a big circle. So basically, if you just drew a big circle going out like maybe 1,000 miles from Jerusalem, that was the whole world to them. It may have actually been smaller. And to them, that was the world. And it was flat, okay? And the water around it, it was linked with Leviathan, this big serpent they imagined actually wrapped around the whole thing and was nestled against the base of the firmament where it came down. And they had these big copper basins, and that was meant to represent the world ocean. It was this one big ring of water that surrounded all the land. And so when you were washing your hands and stuff, you were basically washing your hands in a recreation of the primordial ocean, the world before the flood. Okay.
Wow.
There's this whole big like cosmic imagery that's all wrapped up in the design of the temple. That's why Moses had to go back to the beginning of time to see it created, the 6-day creation story. And then he comes out of it after witnessing it up on the mountain. And he's like, now I know how to build the temple, because he's building it to kind of represent the world as they understood it. So that's what all of that is about. Okay. And then they start talking about the talent and how it's very important to measure these things by a talent. And you've got the temple weight shekel and stuff like that. A shekel is about 1/3 of an ounce. A lot of their coins were designed to weigh right at a shekel. I think it's like 0.96 grams or something like that for all the people using the weird metric measurements. I don't understand those. And then as far as a talent, that's a bit trickier, because they didn't just have one talent. There was a lot of different talents in the ancient world. There was like the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the Attic talent, the Greek talent, the Roman talent. The Israelites, we know they adopted the Babylonian talent because they spent like a couple generations in Babylon. They adopted a lot of Babylonian stuff. And that was about 65 pounds or about 30 kilograms. And then later, they changed over to a different one that was about double that. But we're not exactly sure which one they're talking about in this specific instance, so not sure. Probably the Babylonian talent.
Wow.
So when they talk about, this thing weighs, like 100 talents. Okay, that's like over 650 pounds of pure gold. They weren't carrying around 650 pounds of pure gold to do anything with, okay? And during the big temple period, they may have had that much, but then they lost it in a series of sieges. And they actually talk about this like in the books of Kings, where there's this whole big siege, and then I think it's like Hezekiah, basically he strips all the wealth out of the temple and the palace, and he pays it to these invaders, so the Assyrians will leave them alone and not butcher them all. And so then the Assyrians walk off with all their money. So if they did have that much gold, they didn't have it for long. It all got stolen. The Egyptians also raided them and took some. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up chapter 38.
That's okay. Like one of the things that you circled back to in this one that I highly enjoyed when you mentioned before, because it's not a well-known situation, is that Moses' time spent in the, on top of the mountain is to mimic this time of him time traveling, going back and seeing what it was like at the beginning. And I would just absolutely love to watch the animated adventure of time traveling Moses, who is going back and watching how everything begins. That is one hell of a story. And that's, I think like those are things that does help you kind of appreciate the imagination of the people who are pulling this together, and then even going so far as to let this be somewhat symbolically the representation of why our temple looks like this, because our temple is the reflection of all things coming into existence. It's somewhat profound. I'm not mad at it. Mad at it.
And the whole time traveling thing, that's not the only time you're going to see that in the Bible. When you get into the Gospels, Bill and Ted have to have been involved in that, because like Jesus is born, during the time, like he's born during the census of Quirinius, which is, I think, like 6 AD. But then he's being hunted by Herod a couple years later. However, this takes place in like 4 BC. So Jesus is born in 6 AD. He ages 2 years. Then they go back in time. So they're 8 AD. Now they go back in time to at least 4 BC, because that's when Herod died, so that he could be hunted down by Herod. But then they escape and have to come back up to the present so that he can then be about 30 years old, so that he can be killed under the reign of, or during the time that Pontius Pilate was in there. So yeah, you got to bring him back in time just to put him in danger, so he can then escape and jump forward in time. I explained it in an episode on my podcast called The Order of Things, and I laid out exactly what Bill and Ted would have to have done to get the gospel, the 2 different nativity scenes to make sense.
So you know what?
So if the Bible's real, so is Bill and Ted.
Yep. It was likely a T900 that showed up and said, "Jesus Christ, come with me if you want to live." It was probably one of those situations.
Yeah. That's exactly, Mary was the first Sarah Connor, and like he was going through the phone book, just killing all the Marys. It was crazy.
Oh man.
Yeah, James Cameron, he seriously messed up by not making that movie. That would have been amazing.
Yes. I want to see it now.
Though there actually is a movie like that. It's called Assassin 33 AD or something like that. This atheist has to go back in time to make sure that Jesus dies in the right way because some Muslims are going back in time to try to assassinate Jesus before he gets crucified. It's this hilariously bad movie, but it does something really clever. It explains the naked boy at the Garden of Gethsemane in the Gospel of Mark in the most brilliant way possible. You can find the whole thing on YouTube. It's
I am
great. Go
intrigued.
watch it.
What is the name?
It's Assassin 33 AD, I think is the name of it. It is hilariously bad.
Wow, man. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to look that one up. Oh my goodness. All right.
Yeah.
Oh
The
man.
dangers of time travel, man.
It's
Muslims
amazing.
are going to try to kill Jesus the wrong way.
The wrong way. Atheists have to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
sure that Jesus died the right way.
Yeah. It's brilliant.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look for this. All right, let me get the scriptures back on screen. I think we're ready for the next chapter. And bam, there it is. And this is chapter 39, and it starts with making the vestments for the priesthood. Now, I'm gonna give you, just a little hint when you're reading the Bible, this old preacher's tip. Y'all ready for this? Lean in real close. I can see you. Lean in. No, I'm just playing. But no, here's a little tip. If you see the word vestments in priesthood at the beginning of a chapter, it's about to be boring as fuck. So I just wanted to let everybody know this is an old preacher's tip. It is trustworthy. Let's get this party started. Of the blue, purple, and crimson yarns, they made finely worked vestments for ministering in the holy place. They made the sacred vestments for Aaron, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He made the ephod of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen. Gold leaf was hammered out and cut into threads to work into the blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and into the fine twisted linen and skilled design. They made for the ephod shoulder pieces, joined to at its two edges. The decorated band on it was the same material and workmanship of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen as the Lord had commanded Moses. The onyx stones were prepared and closed in settings of gold filigree and engraved like the engravings of a signet according to the names, of the sons of Israel. He set them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod to be stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He made the breastpiece in skilled work, the work of the ephod of gold, of blue, purple, and crimson, yarns and of fine twisted linen. It was square. The breastplate was made double, because that's how you need that, a span in length and a span in width when doubled. They set it in 4 rows of stones. A row of carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald was the first row, and the second row a turquoise, a sapphire, and a moonstone. Yeah. And the third row adjacent, and I don't, is this an agate or an agate? It's going to be both, and an amethyst. And the fourth row a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. And they were closed in settings of gold filigree. There is a show that's running through my head, and Steven's Universe, is that the name of it? Something like that. That's what's going through my head now, just reading through all of these stones. There were 12 stones with names corresponding to the names of the sons of Israel. They were engraved like signets, each with its name for the 12 tribes. They made on the breastpiece chains of pure gold, twisted like cords, and they made settings of gold filigree and 2 gold rings, and put in the 2 rings on the 2 edges of the breastpiece, and they put the 2 cords of gold and the 2 rings at the edges of the breastpiece. 2 ends of the 2 cords they had attached to the 2 settings of filigree. In this way, they attached it in the front of the shoulder piece of the ephod. Then they made 2 rings of gold and put them at the ends of the breastpiece on its inside edge next to the ephod, if you can believe that. Now, then they made 2 rings of gold and attached them in front to the lower part of the 2 shoulder pieces of the ephod at its joining above the decorated band of the ephod. They bound the breastpiece by its ring to the rings of the ephod with the blue cord, so that it should lie on the decorated band of the ephod, and that the breastpiece should not come loose from the ephod, as the Lord had commanded Moses. This is how you read it if you're in revival meeting. He also made the robe of the ephod woven of all blue yarn, and then the opening of the robe in the middle of it was like the opening in a garment with the binding around its edge so that it might not be torn. On the lower hem of the robe, they made pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yarns and of fine twisted linen. They also made bales. Yeah, bales of pure gold, and put the bales between the pomegranates on the lower hem of the robe, all around between the pomegranates, a bale and a pomegranate, a bale and a pomegranate, all around on the lower hem of the robe for ministering, as the Lord had commanded Moses, because somehow ministry requires pomegranates and bales. Okay, we're going to come back to that. They also made the tunics woven of fine linen for Aaron and his sons, and the turban of fine linen, and the headdress of fine linen, and the linen undergarments of fine twisted linen, and the sash of the fine linen, and the blue, purple, and crimson yarns embroidered with needlework, as the Lord had commanded Moses. So they had the rosette of the holy diadem of pure gold, and wrote on it an inscription like the engraving of a signet, holy to the Lord. They tied it to a blue cord to fasten it on the turban above, as the Lord had commanded Moses. The work completed. Thank fucking God. Thank you. They're finally done with the fucking work. Hopefully, because the chapter is still going for some reason. All right. Okay, this is it. All right. Let me go back up. All right. Thus, all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished. The Israelites had done everything just as the Lord commanded Moses. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent and all that you. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses. Okay. The tent and all its utensils, its claps, its frames, its bars, its pillars and its bases, the covering of tanned ram skins and the covering of fine leather, and the curtain for the screens, the ark of the covenant with its poles and the cover, the table with all its utensils and the bread of the presence, the pure lampstand with its lamp set on it and all its utensils, and the oil for the light, the golden altar, the anointing oil, and the fragrant incense, and the screen for the entrance of the tent, the bronze altar and its grating of bronze, its poles and all its utensils, the basin with its stand, the hangings of the court, its pillars and its bases, and the screen for the gate of the court, its cords and its pegs. There's that pegging again, and all the utensils for the service of the tabernacle. There's so many jokes in the pegging in the tabernacle. Oh my goodness, but I'm going to leave it alone. For the tent of meeting, the finely worked vestments for ministering in the holy place, the sacred vestments for the priest Aaron, and the vestments of his sons to serve as priests. The Israelites had done all the work as the Lord had commanded Moses. When Moses saw that they had done all the work as the Lord commanded, he blessed them. Okay, so I got a question. I know you have some stuff to share on this chapter, but I got a question because it threw me. So halfway I'm being facetious, but other halfway I'm being curious. Why is it worded like that? Like they brought the tabernacle to Moses. What am I missing in that? Because in my head, the imagery is almost like them picking up the tabernacle, like the little people picking up Gulliver and Gulliver's Travel, if that's how that works. Like, how are they bringing the tabernacle to Moses? Help a brother out.
Yeah, so what we're supposed to imagine here is that the workers, they kind of gone off across the side of the mountain in their little valley, and they're building all this stuff, and then now that they're done, they've done all of this work, and they're now parading all of it in front of Moses so they can show him what they've done, and then they can assemble it all, and it can all come together, and he can see how wonderful it all is. And notice the wording here. Like Moses, he sees all of this stuff. He sees how awesome it is, and then he blesses it. Remember that whole 6-day creation thing? All the stuff pops up, and then El Elyon, he looks upon it. He sees what has been made, and he decides it is good, and then he moves on to the next thing. That's what we're supposed to be reminded of. Remember, it's all about the creation. The temple's supposed to represent the universe. And so now Moses is looking upon the creation, because he's supposed to represent like the priest king, which is the earthly embodiment of the God. He's looking upon the creation of the universe. He sees that it is good, and so it gets his blessing. Okay, and that So yeah, that's what we're supposed to be reminded of, because that is what it represents. Okay. And then, of course, like it starts off with the whole tricolor vestments. Okay, you've got the red, you've got the purple, you've got the blue, but it doesn't say it's red, purple, and blue linen. No, it says the red, the purple, the blue, and the linen. Now it's made of linen, so why is it listed separately? That's
Yeah.
because it's talking about the four elements of creation: the
That's
earth,
right.
air,
Okay.
fire, and water. And so the linen, that's the earth, because what is linen? It's made of flax. It grows out of the ground. Okay,
Mm.
that's why they list it as if it's a separate thing and not the thing that the red, blue, and purple are are dyeing. Okay, the red represents fire, of course. The blue represents the sky. The purple represents the ocean, the water, because
Yeah.
that's where they got the purple dye, was from shellfish.
Yeah.
And a cool little tidbit for you is the red was also associated with Asherah, who will later become the spirit of wisdom. And that
Mm.
is why the Holy Spirit is linked with fire. You've always
Oh
got the
yeah.
thing, the spirit, and there's this dove and this fire behind it.
Yes.
That's where it comes from. That's Asherah. Okay, that's the spirit of
Mm.
wisdom. That's this Canaanite goddess. Okay, and that's why early iconography of Mary shows her spinning the red thread that's going to be used in the temple veil for the second temple. And so yeah, that's where all of that comes from. That this is just it's creation. It's elements. Okay, that's all this is. And then they talk about the little breastplate, and it has the 12 stones on it, one for each tribe. This is meant to represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. This is all tied in with astrology. Think of it like birthstones. Okay, each one of these things is meant to represent a certain astrological sign. Okay, so a tribe of Israel is linked with an astrological sign, and that is also linked with a specific stone. And they had some kind of weird, legends surrounding each one, but they've now been retold so many times that it's hard to dig them out. People have
Yeah.
made attempts to do it, and some of them seem to carry weight, but it's kind of hard because we don't know how much comes from the astrology and how much is just coming from other sources and how much is just stuff that they made up because of other little legendary tales. There were numerous tales about the formation of the 12 tribes of Israel. One of them, that they all were born of this one guy named Jacob, who had like two wives and two slave women. That's only one version of the story. In another version, there was this Egyptian guy who went and founded the nation of Israel. And he took a bunch of like his lieutenants or something, and each one of them formed a tribe. And that was
Wow.
just another version of the story. And there were others still. There was another one where like some military leader came around and he decided to just separate the thing out among different people. And that actually came from a Jewish source. So there was a bunch of different versions of the story floating around other than, this one guy who gave birth to a whole nation. But yeah, what it was, you had a whole bunch of different groups of people, and they kind of just picked like 12 of these tribes kind of came together as sort of like this big coalition. But as far, and even then we've kind of got trouble with it because like, was it really just these 12 dudes, or was like the Ammonites and the Moabites and, the Edomites and all that? Because we've got references that they were part of it too. So it's like at some point they kind of just settled on, a certain 12 because it kind of matched up with the zodiac. So yeah, exactly where the stories came from and what they meant is really hard to tell because we're dealing with people who spent centuries rewriting their own history every time a new group came into power. And every time they encountered a new religion or a new culture, which happened a lot because they were constantly being conquered by their neighbors. So that's why the number 12 keeps popping up. It's all astrology. Which they were really into astrology. They had like the signs of the zodiac painted on the ceilings of their temples. And we actually still have one. I can't remember which temple it is, but one of them was discovered, I think, in the early 1900s. And Moses is riding a flaming chariot, just like Zeus, across the sky. And he's like riding it through the signs of the zodiac. This is like sun god imagery.
Oh.
And this is in a Jewish temple. So it's really, really cool stuff.
Maybe the chariot is his time traveling machine, kind of like Doctor Who type of thing.
Yeah. It's like, a Bronze Age TARDIS.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I remember earlier when they had the thing talking about the Egyptian chariots, and it was supposed to have like these extra people in there. I think, well, that couldn't happen because Egyptian chariots, they didn't hold those extra people.
That's right.
But if it's a TARDIS chariot, it's bigger on the inside, and so it can hold the extra dude.
There it is. We solved the case.
See? The Bible makes sense, people. We got it all figured out. So that's what that's all about. And to kind of drive home the point of the whole thing about creation, the temple representing creation, I'm going to let you dive into this next chapter and start reading, and we'll see if any of the people watching can pick out another one of these details.
Ooh.
So there's another one, and it's like I believe it's like in the first 2 verses of chapter 40 that's going to basically tell us that this is all about the creation of the universe.
Oh, this is fun. Okay. All right.
Oh,
all right.
Yep,
so
it's in verse 2.
Verse 2. We're at chapter 40. The Lord, and this is called the Tabernacle erected and its equipment installed. So for those of you who don't know, pegging leads to erections. So be very careful out there. The Lord spoke to Moses on the first day of the first month. You shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. You shall put it in the ark of the covenant, and you shall screen the ark with the curtain. You shall bring in the table and arrange its setting, and you shall bring in the lampstand and set up its lamps. You shall put the golden altar for incense before the ark of the covenant and set up the screen for the entrance of the tabernacle. You shall set the altar of burnt offerings. Where did I go? Oh, there it is. Before the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and place the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. You shall set up the court all around and hang up the screen for the gates of the court. Then you shall take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and all that is in it, and consecrate it and all its furniture, so that it shall become holy, because that's what oil does to stuff. You shall also anoint the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, and consecrate the altar, so that the altar shall be most holy, because that's how that works. You shall also anoint the basin with its stand and consecrate it. Then you shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. You're going to bathe these grown men. Okay, and put on Aaron the sacred vestments, and you shall anoint him and consecrate him, so that he may serve me as priest. You shall bring his sons also and put tunics on them and anoint them, and as you anointed their father, that they may serve me as priests, their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood throughout all their generations. Okay. Moses did everything just as the Lord had commanded him. In the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was set up. Moses set up the tabernacle. He laid its bases and set up its frames and put in its poles and raised up its pillars. And he spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering of the tent over it as the Lord had commanded Moses. He took the covenant and put it into the ark and put the poles on the ark and set the cover above the ark. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle and set up the curtain for screening and screened the Ark of the Covenant as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the table in the tent of meeting on the north side of the tabernacle outside the curtain, and set the bread in order on it before the Lord as the Lord had commanded. He put the lampstand in the tent of meeting opposite the table on the south side of the tabernacle, and set up the lamps before the Lord as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the golden altar in the tent of meeting before the curtain, and offered fragrant incense on it as the Lord commanded Moses. He also put in place the screen for the entrance of the tabernacle. He set the altar of burnt offerings at the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and offered it on the burnt offering and the grain offering as the Lord had commanded Moses. He set the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it for washing, with which Moses and Aaron and his sons washed their hands and their feet, even though they've already been washed, but okay. When they went into the tent of meeting and when they approached the altar, they washed as the Lord had commanded Moses. He set up the court around the tabernacle and the altar, and put up the screen at the gate of the court. So Moses finished the work. Ooh, my favorite part, the end. All right, here we go. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting, because the hot boxing had settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord had filled the tabernacle. Come on, somebody. Whenever the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on each stage of their journey. But if the cloud was not taken up, they did not set out until the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, before the eyes of all the house of Israel at each stage of their journey. Wow. That was a lot of details. There's a lot going on here. I literally had the thought at one moment, Jason, I had the thought, like, it's chapters like this that are the absolute proof. And really, like, chapters like this in the past few chapters that we've been reading are the absolute proof that you're not dealing with any type of omniscient God that has any concern for the future of the people. Because if you're going to be this damn detailed, man, we could have accelerated society's growth. Like, oh my goodness, we could have solved so many problems. We could have had vaccines already. Like, oh, the Dark Ages would have never been a thing. Like, with this amount of detail, boy. Okay, so tell us what we're missing here. What's happening?
Yeah. So right there in the very beginning, when does it say that the whole temple, which is supposed to be like our, the creation of the universe, when does it say that happens? The very first day of the year. Wow. It's meant to be, this is the beginning. It just so happens that they managed to get all this stuff completed at the very end of the year so that it can then be brought to Moses. He can see it all. It gets all set up. He can see that it is good, and he blesses it at the very beginning of time. Okay, that's the takeaway. That's what you're supposed to be thinking about when you read it. Oh wow, imagine the planning after 400 years of slavery. Yahweh brings them out so that they can get all this set up on the first day of the year so it can mirror creation. God is good. Okay. That's what the author is saying. Okay. That's the layers of this literature that we're seeing here. Okay. They put stuff in there like that to make people, who are paying attention, whenever they're reading this, to say, oh, I see what you did there. And it seems like really cool. It's like, imagine the planning that had to be done by God so it could all come together and mirror creation just like that. And what the people don't seem to notice is that imagine the outlining that has to be done by the author to have little parallels and details like that. This can be incredibly deep literature once you learn how to read it and understand it in the context. The Gospel of Mark is like that. There's amazing planning that went into the creation of the Gospel of Mark. I'm convinced that the author of that particular piece of literature used more paper outlining it than he used in actually writing it. It's incredibly complex. All the little things that were set in there in a specific order to line up a very specific way. And so, these were not stupid people. They were explaining these things. They were assembling a very complex literary tale. And this is, one little piece of that. They're drawing upon Genesis chapter 1 to create this portion of the narrative. Now, as far as the whole layout, there's all this detail in there, and the whole thing seems a bit confusing. On my Facebook page, facebook.com/Dragons of Genesis, you can find a picture that I posted middle of last week. It shows like how the whole thing is laid out, and you can see it is a very well-made diagram of the whole layout, and you can see where everything was supposed to be according to these instructions, and how one side mirrors the other. So that's really cool to look at. So head over there when you get a chance and look for it. You'll find it. It's just this little rectangular screenshot. It came from, I believe, Erdman's commentary on the Bible. I think that's where I found that particular diagram, but it's pretty easy to find others like it. But then once they do all this, then everything, from the tent down to the people, they all get anointed with oil. And this is Yahweh setting them aside. These are no longer ordinary objects. This is not a collection of acacia wood and gold and linen. These are now divine implements, okay? They're no longer normal things. These are, sanctified. And because of this, normal people aren't allowed to interact with these things. This group of priests and their helpers are the ones who touch these things, the same way that certain people aren't allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant. If you disobey that, then Yahweh melts your face, like they did in Indiana Jones. So you can't do that, okay? And that's because they've been anointed. They're no longer regular objects. They are now all sacred. And this extends to the priesthood. And this whole thing is to legitimize a specific group of priests who have come into power in Jerusalem. And they're setting this up as sort of an origin tale for themselves. To say, look, we have the right to run the temple because our ancestor did this thing and Yahweh chose him way back in the day. And that's what basically every group that ever ruled in Jerusalem did. They came along and they came up with an origin story that says, this is why we get to run everything. The book of Leviticus is all about how awesome the Levites are. And then the book of Numbers is all about how much the Levites suck. And so, you get to see like both sides of it right there. You read some of these things, like read the book of Numbers and then go and read the books of Chronicles. Chronicles is a retelling of Samuel and Kings, but there's this Levitical twist on it, and it's all about how the Levites are the heroes of the whole show. Every time something happens, this group of Levitical priests shows up, and they do, like there's a palace coup, and they're like saving babies, and they're killing people, and they're casting out all this stuff. But when you read the source material in Samuel and Kings, you're like, the Levites don't even play a role in this. What's happening here? Like, what? It's like reading that novel, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. If you go back and you read the Jane Austen version, which is like really boring, you're like, man, where are the zombies? That's what Chronicles is like. They just came in and added a bunch of zombies and called them Levites. So that's what we're reading here. We're reading someone who's they're writing a story to legitimize their own priesthood by saying, oh, look, our ancestor, this dude named Aaron, he's like chosen. Oh, I'm sorry. We've been mispronouncing it all night. Aaron.
Aaron.
He was chosen by the creator of the universe himself to head up this whole thing. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to continue that. And please don't touch this ancient text because the ink is still wet, okay? And yeah, that's what it's an ideological tale. The Bible's full of them, okay?
Yeah.
And then, like, finally, the whole thing is the presence of Yahweh. You see him, he's in the fire and he's in the smoke, okay? This is, simultaneously volcano god imagery.
Yeah.
But it's also just ancient deistic imagery in general. Okay, there's Egyptian and Greek stories like this where people are led by a column of smoke. Okay, that also pops up in the Odyssey, in the same story that was used about Aaron's betrayal of Yahweh. So, these are just ancient themes that were common in the Mediterranean world. But they also have another purpose. Whenever they would go in to worship Yahweh, they would light the lampstands, the menorah, and it symbolized the sun god Shamash and his spreading of light across the world. And so the lit candles was the presence of a deity, because that was, think of Noah's Ark. The light of God couldn't penetrate the thing until finally they cut a hole in the top to make a window, and then the light of God shone into the darkness of the ark. They were down in the underworld, and then finally light came to them. Okay, this is Samson coming up after being down in the dungeon, and his golden hair has grown back. The sun god has returned. This is Gandalf riding over the hill on the third day to save that's what this is, okay? It's the return of the sun god, okay? And that's why fire is meant to represent, the presence of a deity. And so is the smoke, because they burned copious amounts of incense and cannabis in these rituals, or as I like to call it, hotboxing the Holy of Holies.
Yes,
and
the Most High.
This is a fact. This is not it was long speculated, and then when they actually examined the smoke residue at the temple at Tel Arad, the only temple to Yahweh still, in existence in Israel. The copious amounts of smoke residue indicate that these people were probably on the verge of oxygen deprivation. Okay, they were burning this stuff by the pound in a very enclosed space. Okay, and this again was not unique to them. This was a common practice, and that's why the presence of smoke in the temple indicated the presence of Yahweh. That's how you found your God. You got stoned.
That's right.
Okay? That's why Ezekiel starved himself for like a month and then chowed down on a bunch of flowers. He was eating poppies. Okay? So yeah, that's what we're looking at here. The presence of Yahweh. And I'm not trying to like degrade the thing. Oh, look how stupid it is.
No.
These were culturally important to people. This is how they connected with their spirits, whether it was the Native Americans burning damp pine boughs inside of this little enclosed space, or the Assyrians, throwing these things on a brazier inside of a small tent, the thermal vents in these little volcanic regions in Greece where these oracles would sit and just inhale this smoke, all these toxic fumes. These were sacred things that, people have done throughout history, and it was like very culturally important to them. And so I'm not like, these people, they were all stupid for believing this. No.
Right.
They did this because they believed it helped them to achieve something, okay?
Yeah.
And it was culturally important. So I'm just providing that so that people can understand the literature and where these symbols come from and why they were important.
Yeah. Man,
So
I love it. And now, I've engaged in a little thought experiment just thinking about this because now it seems that, well, I just talked to Moses and Moses just kind of filled me in because Moses is our resident time traveler. And so Moses just let me know that it was a misinterpretation when people said that Lucifer got kicked out of heaven because he wanted to ascend above God. That's not what happened. He wanted to be the most. So they got in an argument over the weed because God was like, "No, I'm gonna be the most high," and Lucifer was trying to get more than he was supposed to get. He was puffing, but he wasn't passing. This is how he got kicked out of heaven. I've just solved it. Moses told me
oh,
firsthand, just now, because he's time traveling and shit.
yeah,
So
he's got the TARDIS chariot. He can just show up.
Yes.
You know.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
yeah. And I'd seen a comment earlier. Someone was asking if Asherah was Yahweh's wife.
Ooh.
Yes and no. So originally, Yahweh's wife was the goddess Anat. Okay,
Yes.
hang on. Let me
Yes.
let's go way back. Originally, Yahweh was not even part of the Canaanite pantheon.
Yeah.
He got introduced to the Canaanite pantheon. He came from somewhere to the south, probably northwestern Arabia, and eventually some of these people migrated along the different trade routes into Canaan, and they brought with them the worship of Yahweh, who at that point was probably already a composite deity involving some Arabian and Egyptian gods, including the goddess Hathor. Once this got in there, because his association with war and stuff like that, he got wrapped up with the Canaanite god Baal. The one he's the big enemy of Yahweh. No, they were not enemies. They were merged together. Yahweh and Baal were merged. One of the Ugaritic texts actually, El Elyon renames Baal to Yahweh. He gives him a new honorific title. Now you've ascended. You're now greater. No longer will you be called Baal. From this day you shall be called Yah, which was one of the ways that they wrote Yahweh. There was Yah, Yahweh, Yahoo. There were several different variations of it. It's all the same thing, and it's a title that means Lord. But originally, it may have been a war cry, which is a little pet theory I have. There's about a dozen different references in the Bible that seem to indicate this, and most of them are in the Psalms about how the name of Yahweh is a battle cry.
Yes, that's right.
And it seems like some of the earliest references to Yahweh involved this group of people who were very warlike. It was one of the different Shasu tribes. It was the Shasu of Yah, or of Yahweh, and the Egyptians wrote about them. And it may have been like a battle cry where they invoked the name of their deity as they charged into battle. From there, it spread, it merged with all sorts of things. And when he merged with the Canaanite deity, he was probably a sort of counterpart to Baal. Because a lot of these gods, you would have a similar god worshipped in multiple places. And even though it was a different god, if they were similar, they said, oh, well, it's the same God, just with different names. Yeah. And so if you're in one spot, oh, it's Baal. You're in this other spot, oh, it's Yahweh. And you didn't see anything wrong with it, okay? Like, if you were in Greece, you just found the Greek god that was the closest to the Egyptian god that you worship back home. And you're like, it's the same God. He just has a different name. He's got a Greek name here because he's in Greece. They're not going to pronounce an Egyptian name, when in Rome, right?
Yep.
And so he eventually gets merged, like he kind of gets adopted into the Canaanite pantheon and gets merged in with the god Baal. And gradually over time, as Baal worship became more popular and El faded into the background, Baal, rose in prominence and gets this new honorific title of Yah or Yahweh, which is supposed to be like a sort of Lord of Lords. And so now Baal is now a super Baal. And so he's now being called Baal or Yahweh. And when this happens, of course, he takes on all the different, details associated with Baal. His right hand is raised. He's the rider on the clouds. He's a god of grain and a god of storms. There's no indication he was a storm god when he was down south. But now that he's in Canaan, he's a storm god. Wow. He lives in a magical garden atop Mount Zaphon. This is the sacred mountain of Baal. This is way up in Syria. It has nothing to do with Arabia, okay? Wow. And so the holy mountain of God has now moved, and it's going to move again and again and again. It's going to pop up in Egypt. We covered that in one of the early episodes. When they do the river crossing, they talk about Mount Zaphon in the Nile Delta. But this is a mountain in Syria. And then later, it gets moved again to Jerusalem. This is Mount Zion. It's just a variant of the name Zaphon, where Baal lives. So he does that. Yikes. And, of course, when he gets merged with Baal, he, of course, takes his wife, which was the goddess Anat. Anat was vicious. The closest thing that you would be familiar with would be the goddess Kali. She has like a necklace of human hands, a belt of human heads. She's got a pair of curved swords. She's this war goddess. She takes no prisoners. She is extremely violent. There's this one Canaanite story where she gets summoned to El's tent, and when she shows up, she had just come off the field of battle, and she's dripping blood all over his carpet. And El is kind of mad because there's all this gore staining his nice, holy carpets. And Anat just doesn't give a shit. And when Baal gets killed by his brother Mot, who's like the god of death, Anat goes and chops him up. Like she butchers the god of death, okay? She's that hardcore. And that's how Baal eventually gets resurrected. So that becomes Yahweh's wife. And we have this over in Egypt in the temple at Elephantine. It talks about Yahweh and his wife Anat. And she's called Anat Yahu, Anat of Yahweh. And she was worshipped openly by these Jews living in Egypt. Eventually, though, Yahweh is also merged with his father. Well, his adoptive father, now that he's part of the Canaanite pantheon, El Elyon. And like when Deuteronomy is written, there's still two separate deities. El is, instead of like the table of nations that we find in Genesis, where the people that come off the ark and they go out, and then that's how you get all the different nations and all the different languages. Well, there's a different version of it in Deuteronomy 32, where El, he's looking at the world, and he's like, how should I divide this up? And then he goes, I got it. I'll split it up into 70 nations, and I'll give one to each of my children, each of my sons. And you know what? My favorite nation, Israel, I'll give that one to my favorite son, Yahweh. That's Deuteronomy 32:8. The version you read is probably kind of corrupted. They've rewritten that thing, trying to jankify the word so many times that you can't tell there's two different deities there. Read the oldest copy of that available. It comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran text. Yeah. If you read that, it's quite clear that El Elyon and Yahweh are two different deities, and he's giving the nation to all of his sons, okay?
Wow, yeah.
So when this happens, when Yahweh and El finally get merged to become Yahweh El, or Lord God, as it may be rendered in your Bible, Yahweh then becomes the creator of the universe. Because remember in Genesis 1, it's El who does the whole 6-day creation account.
That's right.
In Genesis 2, Yahweh is just a craftsman God who builds some stuff out of clay. This is based off the story of Enki. Okay.
Yeah.
So Later, Yahweh and El, they get merged together, on their long path toward monotheism. And when that happens, he takes El's consort, Asherah, which at this point would have been Yahweh's mom. But now the son and the father have been merged together by some sects of Judaism. And so Yahweh and El are no longer two separate deities. They're now just one, called Yahweh El. And Asherah, the consort of El Elyon and co-creator of the universe, there's stories in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where El Elyon, he basically funnels his power through the goddess of wisdom, and that's how everything is created, including Yahweh. Is it? I think it's Proverbs that talks about it. It's one of the pieces of wisdom literature. Anyway, so when this happens, Asherah then becomes the consort of Yahweh because Yahweh and El have now been merged. And for a brief period of time, probably just a couple centuries, though it did carry on with other, with like sectarian Judaism well into the Christian period, Yahweh's wife was his former mother, Asherah. And we actually have some temples that talks about Yahweh and his Asherah. And some people have tried to say, oh, well, it's talking about the Asherah poles, which that is a legitimate argument. There were these things called Asherah poles, and it was these like little wooden idols that signified a deity. The problem is the way that these inscriptions were written. And when scholars have looked at some of the other, things concerning these particular inscriptions and how it's phrased, they're extremely doubtful that it means like the like Yahweh's, little wooden idol pole. They think that it's actually meaning the goddess Asherah, not this little wooden object. And it has to do with like the grammar and like the types of words used. It's hard for me to follow it because I'm not, well versed in reading ancient Hebrew. But I can, if anyone's interested in that, hit me up on Facebook. I can try to find links to the articles. Actually, I had to track one of these articles down. It took me like 2 hours to find a copy of it, just so I could mention a detail in an episode of the podcast and, make sure I was quoting the right thing. But yeah, it's really cool stuff. There's a book on it. I think it's called The Mythology of Eden, and it has a whole chapter all about Yahweh and the Asherah poles. And if anyone wants, you can look up that book. It's not too expensive. It's not one of the ones that's like $150, but yeah. So I probably took like 20 minutes explaining that, but sort of. Asherah was Yahweh's wife for a period of time. She was his mother before that, and before that, they weren't even part of the same pantheon.
That is very interesting. Like that has my mind in a lot of places. So we've read through all of these chapters, and you said it. We're right at where are we at? We're at 6:29 my time. So it's
7:29. Oh man, I got it going for one more minute. Oh, I got it. So, and that is for one version of Yahweh. There were actually multiple Yahwehs worshipped in the ancient Near East. We know of about a dozen of them. There's, I think, 3 or 4 of them just mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. So that there wasn't just one Yahweh. They had a bunch of Yahwehs.
Oh man. Oh
yes. Yes, Muttley. That
tracks. Oh man.
So Paul actually addresses that topic in one of his letters to the Corinthians. He's like, dude, I know that your dad croaked, but you can't go banging your stepmom.
Yep. Well, didn't one of David's sons do that as a form of protest? Like, I think it may have been Absalom who, when he was upset with
Oh
David,
yeah, he
actually,
like got all of his consorts and stuff, and like had a big
uh-huh,
orgy, up on the palace
on the
roof.
palace top. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, oh, man, I can't wait to get to that chapter. Oh
yeah.
man,
David was
orgy
like a
on the
horrible
rooftop.
individual. He's like,
It was
oh
pretty bad.
man, that this dude's gonna find out that I raped his wife. You know what? I'll have him killed.
Yes,
And then
this is
Yahweh's
David.
like, as punishment, David, I'm gonna go kill the baby as soon as it's born. And it's like,
Yes,
what?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And David is the one that God calls a man after his own heart. you know, well, according to David.
Yeah, yeah. It's and this is why you don't get morality from the Bible.
Yep, for sure.
There's there are much better sources. Like if you want morality, go watch Mr. Rogers.
Oh yeah,
You like,
you know.
yeah, there you go. Go watch Mr. Rogers. Okay.
Oh man, this is so. The Book of Exodus is obviously has had a major impact on for Christians on how they view history for sure.
Oh yeah.
Just the character Moses, because this is where we get introduced to Moses. But of course, for most of us, especially those of us who are more charismatic believers or Protestant believers, our understanding of Scripture was that Moses wrote these first 5 books. And so this is how impactful Exodus is, because when you get to Exodus, it's like, this is the guy who wrote all 5 of these books. I have a thought experiment for you. How different do you think the Bible would be if there was no Moses and and I'm not talking about historically, I'm talking about narratively, if there was no Moses and there was no Exodus? And the second part of that question is, because this is a big research question, do you think any of this story has anything to do with the Hyksos or the Sea Peoples? And so I'll let you wrestle with all of that as you may.
Okay. So first question: if we got rid of the whole Moses character, how different would the Bible be? The New Testament would certainly undergo some major changes because, to some extent, Mark and to a much greater extent, Matthew were modeling their idea of this savior figure after Moses. They're actually rewriting some of the stories of Moses to be stories of
Wow.
Jesus. That's why there's the whole slaughter of the innocents in Matthew's gospel.
Yeah.
It's the story of Moses being retooled for a later audience. Like that never happened. Okay. And like, not to say that Herod wouldn't have done that. If he had thought that somewhere out there was a 2-year-old child who might be a threat to him, he absolutely would have killed a whole bunch of babies.
Yeah.
That's the kind of guy Herod was. And the thing is, though, had he done that, he would have bragged about it. Okay. And Herod was one of the most well-documented figures of the time. And there's no word of that. But also, like, we have census data from the region at the time. And there's no sudden time when, oh my God, there's like this huge dip in the male population among this certain age group. Okay.
Right.
That's simply not there. And it would be if Herod had gone out and killed a whole bunch of babies. Okay. It would have been there. Okay. No one noticed this. Okay. It didn't happen. It isn't based on reality. Okay. It's based on Exodus. So that certainly would have changed. The Hebrew Bible, though, wouldn't really be much different. I mean, we wouldn't have the Torah.
Wow.
But once you get out of the first 5 books and like the book of Joshua,
Yeah.
once you get out of that, okay, so the first 6 books, you go through almost the rest of the Old Testament without a single reference to Moses, the Exodus, the Ten Commandments, this whole story, the founding of the nation, all of that. And there's a very good reason. They didn't know the story when the majority of the Old Testament was written. You don't see a single reference until you get into the very final books of the Old Testament. At this point, you're getting into stuff that was likely written in the early 2nd century BC. So we're talking a couple hundred years before Paul wrote his letters, when
Wow.
some of the later prophetic books are being written. Then you start finding faint hints, a few little references here and there to Moses and the Exodus. But for that whole period, like going from basically from Judges all the way up through Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they have no clue who Moses is. They don't know about any Exodus. They've never heard of it. Because it hadn't been written yet. They didn't know the story because there was no story. It's looking more and more like the Exodus was written in the late 3rd century BC.
Wow.
So the Old Testament wouldn't really change much because they already didn't have it. And if you don't believe, load up each of those books and just do a word search for Moses or Egypt.
Wow.
They don't know about it. And the few times it pops up in the Bible, which is much later, some of those are actually later insertions. And you can tell because they interrupt the text. If you read the line above it and the line below it, they flow together. There's just this weird insertion where someone goes, we should probably mention something about the Exodus here. This seems important. And then they just kind of write it in there, and it screws up the text. Old Testament wouldn't change much because they already didn't have it for the vast majority of it. It's not until you get close to the time that Daniel was written, but before you get people who know about Moses. They just didn't know at that point. The first 5 books of the Bible, the bulk of that literature seems to be fairly late, and significant portions of it are actually some of the youngest parts of the Hebrew Bible. Now, as far as the Hyksos or the Sea People.
Yeah.
So the Hyksos, for anyone who doesn't know, this is a group of Semitic people who had gone into Egypt probably just through assorted migrations, because as we learned from the story of Abraham and of I think also Isaac, also Joseph, the Middle East kind of sucks when it comes to your crops being stable. There's this thing called drought, and when you live in an arid hill country, drought really, really sucks because you already don't have much in the way of water or arable soil.
Yeah.
So if you got a year without much rain, guess what? You either get to move to Egypt or you get to die. So everyone just moved to Egypt, which that happened a lot. It was called the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. And for a reason. They didn't depend on rain. They had the Nile. So, ta-da, they get to bypass all that horrible misery that everyone else had to deal with. So you always had these Semitic groups living in Egypt. And the Hyksos were one of them. It was this group of people that had gone in there. It probably wasn't this huge migration of people. It was just people who went in there, and then more people went in, and more people went in. Over the course of centuries, it got to the point where these Semitic people in Egypt, they were so numerous, they took control. Yeah. And it probably wasn't some kind of hostile takeover as it was later depicted. They just eventually outvoted everyone, okay?
Yep.
They had the control. They ran the thing. And they ran the thing for centuries. Eventually, though, your native Egyptians didn't like them, and they eventually kind of ran them out, and the Hyksos left. And they went east across the Sinai and likely just dispersed. Went into Canaan, went into Assyria, went into Sumer. They went all over, which it's Sumer, not Sumeria. Okay. It's like when people say revelations. There's no S at the end.
Yes.
Sumer. The Sumerian people are from Sumer. And so they disperse, they go to the east, and they kind of just fall out of history. And then over the centuries, we get all these stories. The Egyptians talk about them, but mostly we get Greek versions of the stories. And they're like, let me tell you about, they came in and they conquered Egypt and they took over. We don't really have good evidence of that. It's these things, these tales that are really exaggerated, because these early historians, they weren't trying to be that historically accurate, because these practices of trying to be historically accurate and cite your sources and everything else, they didn't really exist, and they were like just being invented at the time, okay? So you kind of just told stories, okay? I heard this story, and you wrote it down as history, okay? And these Hyksos, they came in and they took over and they ruled the thing, and it was this horrible thing, and they restricted the religion of Egypt and everything else. And then the Egyptians, they had this pharaoh named Ramses. He came and he drove them out and forced. Okay, some tidbits of it are true. Other parts are just exaggerations that have happened over the centuries. The Hyksos connection. Now, people have been trying to connect the Exodus with the Hyksos for ages, because they're like, a Semitic people who got driven out, and there was this guy named Ramses, and he was involved, and they went east across the Sinai into Canaan. Yeah, I see it. But here's a problem. If archaeologists could connect the Hyksos with the Israelites, it would have been done by now.
Yep.
Here's, at the time, there was no mass migration the way that you have in Exodus, okay? Now, the Hyksos, they did exist. They did get driven out and fled and all that. But there were no stories about how they went out and like founded the nation of Israel or anything like that. Canaan did not suddenly split off, and become its own thing. Like, Egypt still ruled the place at the time, okay? The Hyksos couldn't flee to Canaan to get away from Egypt. That was still Egypt, okay? That's like fleeing Georgia by going into Florida to get away from the United States. You're still in it, okay? So, you couldn't leave Egypt to go into Canaan and be out of Egypt, because Canaan was still Egypt, okay? It was later that Canaan and Egypt were two separate things, and that's when these stories were written. That they always betray themselves by mentioning, more modern boundaries and borders, and not the time in which they're supposed to take place. Now, where you get the actual Hyksos and Moses connection comes from these later Greek writers. They're writing these stories about the Hyksos and about Egypt and all these other things. And you have these stories in which, like there's one in particular in which the Egyptians are doing a thing similar to what the Jews did with the Table of Nations, where they're saying, oh, look, all these people, they came off the ark and they went out and they scattered around the world, and that's how we got all the nations and all the different civilizations and the different languages and stuff. Well, the Egyptians had a story like that, and it was where they had this Egyptian nobility who decided to go out and basically just set up colonies all over the world, and so they go out and they founded the city of Athens and Jerusalem and everywhere else, basically.
Wow.
Everywhere in the world was basically just an Egyptian colony. And that's how you got all the people of the world with all the nations and all their different languages. They all came from Mother Egypt. And one of these different stories which seems like it was an Egyptian story and it got retooled by the Greeks, talks about these filthy Hyksos, and they all had leprosy because they're really bashing on the Hyksos, right? And they're like, oh yeah, and they came out and they had this rebel leader. He was this Egyptian priest. His name was Moses, and he led this rebellion of all the Hyksos, and they got driven out, and they fled, and they went into Canaan, and they became the Israelites. And so now you've got this really horrible propaganda. And now we get into this thing where the dating of these stories becomes important and we don't have clear answers. People are now saying, is the writing of Exodus a response to this anti-Semitic propaganda where they say that the Hyksos is all these horrible lepers that led this rebellion and eventually got defeated and got driven off, and they formed this gigantic leper colony called Israel. And then Exodus comes along and says, oh, look, we are this proud people who we weren't rebellious. We had to flee for our lives. And what did we do? We went over here and we established this great promised land. Oh, and it isn't this barren, filthy desert like the Egyptians said. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. And leprosy, our founder could cure leprosy. And it really looks like scholars are starting to point out that there are passages in these stories in the Hebrew Bible that seem to be a reaction to stories that were written by like Hecataeus of Abdera in the 4th century BC. Different guys like that. And if that's the case, then it takes the dating of Exodus and it moves it up quite a bit. This isn't some 7th or 8th century writing, certainly not 12th century. It may be a 3rd century or a 4th century at the earliest. And maybe that's why the rest of the Old Testament doesn't know about Moses, because it wasn't written yet, because it was written as a response to things that were written in like the year 350 BC. And that's very interesting because before that time, we can't find any evidence that anyone in the Jewish world knew anything about Moses or the Exodus or anything like that. And at the time, they even had other versions of the story of how they came to be and their connections with Egypt and stuff like that. And no one was trying to correct them on that. No one was saying, oh, well, that can't be the story because we actually came from this guy named Moses who led our people here. There were these other versions of the story floating around, and no one had a problem with it. And it may be because they didn't write the story of Moses as this inspirational tale, but as a way to refute this Greek and Egyptian idea that they were a bunch of filthy lepers who had to get driven out to go live in the desert somewhere. And once you realize that that's a very real possibility, then some of the reason why these stories, not these other stories in the Bible, not knowing about Moses, then it starts to make sense. They didn't know because Hecataeus of Abdera hadn't written his scandalous tales about the Jews yet. So the Jews hadn't written anything to refute him yet. And that's why all of these other stories don't know anything about Moses and the Exodus, because it just didn't exist. There's this guy, Gad Barnea, who talks about this. He's this scholar. Hang on, let me see. I was actually reading one of his papers earlier. Let's see. Gad Barnea. He works in the University of Haifa in Israel. And he's this scholar of like the Hebrew Bible. And he writes about this very idea, which until he started writing about it, the only ones who were really toying around with this were scholars who didn't hold PhDs. They were writing about these things. They had good arguments, but they didn't have I guess like the academic chops for people to take their ideas and arguments seriously. But now there are, I think, 3 or 4 scholars at well-known universities who are also proponents of this idea that parts of the Old Testament are written as a response to some of these Greek writings. Those of like Hecataeus, Berosus, Manetho, things like that. And the more you read about it, the ones from these different scholars and from the original, which came from a book called Berosus in Genesis, Manetho, and Exodus by Russell Gamirkin, who was the original proponent of this idea. The more you read about it, the more sense it makes. And with more scholars pitching in and pointing out that there's really no reason to believe it's any earlier than this, then yeah, it really does seem like that's a very real possibility. And it would explain why there's a complete silence in Jewish sources about these topics until like the mid-3rd century BC.
Wow. Man.
Yeah, it's like they just don't know. They have no, not just that they're not talking about it, but when the topic comes up, they seem to have ideas that do not match what we find in the Torah. Mm-hmm. Like when the celebration of the Passover comes up, they talk about it, but it's not called the Passover. It's got a different name, and it doesn't have the Exodus origin story that we know about. They don't talk about that at all. So when they should be talking about these things, they seem to have no clue. And that's really cool. That's like really fascinating.
Man. Well, listen, you said it. You hit the nail on the head. We did finish this tonight, and we finished it at the time that you said we would. And listen, for those of you who are participating, 20 of you have already voted. If you have not voted, get your votes in. Are you new here? Yes or no? Let us know. Jason, we've been on this journey for the whole book of Exodus, which I sometimes called the month of Exodus. We have learned a lot in this period of time. We've explored a lot. I know our viewers have gotten a lot of value out of these conversations and out of these sessions. And so, of course, as we kind of do every week to kind of close out, I don't want tonight to be too much different. If you would, let people know where they can find you and what you're excited about working on.
All right. So, as usual, thank all of you for being here. Thanks for the likes and the comments, the questions, the super chats, all of that. That is amazing. And I don't want to speak for Darante, but for me, that's why I do this, is because I believe that there are people out there who get something out of the effort that I put into this. And so it's people like you that are very much the reason why my podcast is still in existence. Originally, I only meant to do the book of Genesis. So my show should have ended like 8 years ago. And I'm still here putting in the work every single week because of people like you. So first and foremost, thank you. I literally would not be sitting here, with my studio and my equipment and this camera and everything if it wasn't for people like you. So thank you for that. And as far as what I'm excited about, yesterday I dropped a new episode to the podcast, or rather a retooling of an old episode. I'm redoing all of Genesis. And so yesterday I dropped a revised version of episode 3. It's about triple the length of the original version. So go back and look for episode 3. Get any podcast app like Good Pods, Stitcher, Spreaker, Apple Podcast, anything like that, and just scroll all the way back to episode 3, and you're going to see that it's like, I don't know, 45 minutes long instead of like 15. And download that and give it a listen. It covers the Garden of Eden story, how it's different from the Genesis 1 creation account, and some of the strange and complex theology behind it, because it's an old story involving people who now kind of suffer in their efforts to get food, which was common all over like North Africa and Western Asia. But it's more than that. It's also about a group of temple priests who have lost access to the temple. And it's also about the demotion of goddesses like Asherah, and how, like these women that we talked about just recently, have been sort of pushed out of their once prominent place in the temple practices. And so it's about a great many things, and it's very multi-layered, very complex. And so we go into that in episode 3. And as far as other things I'm excited about, I'm currently writing, I believe, episode 8, which is the first episode talking about Abraham. And we're getting into some really fun stuff, like how in one version of the story, there were these giants who went and they built the Tower of Babel. And one of these giants, these Babylonian giants, was the ancestor to Abraham. And so Abe is supposed to be this like great grandson of a giant. And we're going to talk about his relationship with Nimrod, this weird enigmatic figure that pops up a couple of times in Genesis. He's this dude who, he's listed as some kind of great hero, this mighty hunter. He's kind of like Orion. And then right after that, they start talking about how these people went in and they built this big city and this tower. So what's with Nimrod? Why is he in there? And as we talk more about the patriarchs, we're going to get into Nimrod and who he was and how he pops up again later in Hebrew mythology. And he has this epic battle with one of the descendants of Abraham. And that leads to this whole big chain of events. And we're also going to talk about why the word Nimrod in like modern culture is used as an insult for someone to call someone an idiot. You've probably heard that before.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you're such a Nimrod. Well, hang on. If he was this really awesome king and this mighty hunter, why would that be an insult? So we're going to talk about that. That's going to be coming up. And so, that's some of the things I'm working on now. I'm really I'm taking my current level of detail and quality of research and applying that to my earliest episodes. So I'm redoing the first 14 episodes of the podcast. I'm about halfway through writing them. I just started recording the things. So that's what's going to be coming out over the next several months, leading up to me dropping my 100th episode, which is going to launch us straight into the New Testament as we tackle the Gospel of Mark, the earliest gospel. Though it might actually be the second oldest, because one of the letters of Paul, which Paul didn't actually write, might actually be our oldest gospel. And we're going to talk about that too. So that's what I got going on. And then as far as where to find me, grab your phone, download any podcast app. There's a ton of them. And just search Dragons and Genesis and you'll find me. It's the big orange logo with a silhouette of Godzilla attacking Jerusalem. It's pretty easy to spot. And then just pick your favorite topic and download them. And if you need links to anything, dragonsandgenesis.com, you can find links to everything on there. recommended reading, descriptions of some of my most recent episodes, all sorts of stuff like that. My social media links, that's all on there. And if you're looking for me on social media, just pick a platform, type Dragons in Genesis, and look for that same orange logo. I'm on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it today, Facebook. I think I'm on Instagram. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. There's something called Blue Sky. It looks like Twitter,
I've heard about
but
it.
it has a butterfly instead of a bird.
Oh,
I'm wondering if it's going to be like Mastodon or Threads or that other Threads. There was two different social medias called Threads.
I did not know that.
Yeah, there was two of them. So I guess we'll see. Is this the new Twitter or is just the new Mastodon or Threads or Threads 2.0? I guess we'll find out in a month, if people stay on it or if they all just go back to Twitter. I don't know.
Social media is becoming a graveyard, man. They don't know what to do with it anymore.
Yeah. We should all just go back to MySpace. You could have your own songs on there.
Yes, I had
Tom
songs
was your
on
first
mine.
Friend.
Always.
And he didn't sell your data to Russia. That's
a plus.
He didn't hack my phone and start listening to me.
Oh man.
I had a conversation with someone one day about white wall tires, and the next day Facebook starts showing me ads for white wall. I didn't even know those were still a thing. I thought those went out when they filmed the last episode of The Three Stooges. But no, Facebook's like, dude, you want white wall tires? I heard you yesterday. We got them.
You want them? We got them.
So yeah, Tom from MySpace, he never did that to us, guys.
Nope, he did not.
We need to go back. Plus, it was more user friendly.
Oh, for sure.
So,
well, man, Jason, thank you for being here with me, man, for the entire month of Exodus. This has been, I did it again, for the entire book of Exodus. This has been just one hell of a conversation, and we've got to pick another book to do this again on, because this has been one hell of a collaboration. I'm going to drop you into the back as I go ahead and say my little last thoughts. Everybody, Exodus has been one hell of a journey. When I started this, I had no clue we'd make it this far. I've been stating from the very beginning that these sessions are not necessarily meant to be theology. It's more therapy. It's a way for all of us as human beings who've been impacted by these stories, whether negatively or positively. It's a way for us to reacclimate ourselves to these stories by being able to authentically engage without having to sacrifice our agency and our autonomy. To be able to hear these stories, to feel what we feel, think what we think, share what we think, laugh when we want to fucking laugh, so that we can better understand these stories and the context, so that we can have the better position. And paraphrasing Obi-Wan Kenobi, we always want to have that high ground. And it's sessions like these that gives us that opportunity. Again, when I started this, I had no clue that we'd make it. We've made it through 2 whole books. I actually made up in my mind when I first started doing these with Genesis that, hey, I'm going to do these for a few weeks. And if people aren't really watching, then, I'm just going to take it off my plate. And man, here we are. We're at the end of an episode and there's still more than 20 of you watching. And there's no telling how many of you are going to be watching this before the end of the week. And I think it's because of that statement that this isn't theology. This is therapy. I think people come and enjoy these segments because this is healing. This is helpful. And in spite of all of the cussing and the off-color jokes that I make, this is wholesome. You know what I'm saying? And that's the beauty of community to me, that none of us have to come together and pretend to be anything. We come together and be ourselves, and it's that authenticity that makes the world go round. So I just want to say that I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you and what you bring to the table in these conversations. And I'm looking forward to pursuing this journey and moving forward, and looking forward to having each and every single one of you along for the ride. Over the past 7 months, this channel has grown from 52 subscribers to over 5,700 subscribers at this moment. And I don't think that's because I'm so great. I think that's because this is a real need. And I'm going to do my best to keep pushing this as much as I can. Because I'm not going to lie. No, I'm here to make a positive impact on the world as much as I can. And at the end of the day, this is about building community for me. I love the fact that we're having these conversations, but I want these conversations to tie back into community. I want these conversations. What I absolutely love is the conversations that take place in the chat, and then how those conversations overflow into Discord, which, shameless plug, if you've not connected with our Discord yet, what are you waiting on? There are a lot of great people who are a part of our community, who are in there and are waiting to do community with you. So that's literally all I have for tonight. I've got to separate. Man, I have a little bit more work to do at work, and then we also have to prepare for festivities tomorrow and all that stuff. And then of course I also have to drop a video tomorrow as well. So it's going to be a long one, but I love y'all so much, man. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. Consider connecting. See, that's doing stuff it ain't supposed to be doing. Consider joining, connecting, or supporting this channel, community, or content in any way that makes sense for you. And then, of course, last but not least, check out the merch because it's dope, and it is. And then I have a new book. It's available for pre-release now. Officially, it will be available on Friday. Black Non-Believers, Black Non-Believer Next Door. That's me. I'm walking you through my life. If you are interested, I'm encouraging you to check that out. If you're interested in seeing how many people play a part into making this community do what it do, make sure you stick around and watch the credits, which are getting ready to start in a few. So thank you all for hanging out with me. I love you all. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and be the bridge. I will holla at you later.
Woo, yeah. I was living my life in the servitude of misunderstandings of people I loved. Giving it all, it was never enough. Because of the fall, I could never get up. I moved on from their misunderstandings. I am no longer standing under them. I was drowning, now I swim. 'Cause I found the strength within. I don't need your absent friend. 'Cause I got this, yeah. 'Cause I got this, yeah. 'Cause I got this, yeah. 'Cause